No? Yes. Okay, so imagine the whole entire whiteboard is a cell. Okay? And then what happens in that cell? What happens in that cell? You have a mitochondria. Right here is a mitochondria. And inside of the mitochondria, you have that inner fold, which is called what? The inner fold was called what? Huh? You do have a quiz over it. Chris, Tay, is that right? And then this is the outer membrane. And right here, that space between the outer membrane and the inner membrane is called intermembrane space. Intermembrane space. Am I making some sense? Right here in the cytoplasm, glucose broke down to pyruvate. Pyruvate then was shifted into the mitochondria. Pyruvate was converted to acetyl-CoA. Right? Acetyl-CoA was going through here, and citric acid Krebs cycle occurred. Am I making some sense a little bit of what I want to say? I hope it is making sense with that. And right here, inside of Krebs, as you saw it already, what are the molecules that they were made? NADH, right? And 1 ATP, NADH, and what else? FADH2. Am I making some sense a little bit? You just saw it. In Krebs cycle, NADH was made, 3 NADH was made, NADH was made. Am I making some sense, everybody? So, all of these NADHs are accumulating inside of mitochondria. I hope I'm making some sense. Then, what happens? These NADH go through a series of protein molecule, which is called electron transport chain, all of them, right here. It goes through a series of these protein molecules. All of that NADH and FADH2 become, it doesn't matter how big I draw this, I still am short of space. NADH becomes, or FADH2 becomes FAD. What do you think happens to the hydrogen? Oh, what happens to the hydrogen? Goes here. Goes in that space between the outer membrane and inner membrane. NADH goes through these protein molecules again, which is called electron, and the NADH becomes NAD. What happens to the hydrogen? It goes here. Am I making some sense? So all of these NADHs and FADH2, they are converted into FAD and NAD, and what happens to the hydrogen goes here. Maricela, do I make sense? I mean, see, Maricela means everybody. Does it make sense? All of these NADH and FADHs, I was hoping to draw this a little bit bigger, but again, my perception of thinking of future and writing is not very well. But anyhow, so all of that hydrogen is accumulated here. Now what happened? This is this accumulation of the hydrogen here between the inner membrane, cristae, and outer membrane is called chemoosmosis. All of that hydrogen, I'm going to draw it here. So hydrogen is everywhere. All of this hydrogen right here, there is a molecule here called, and this is also part of the electron transport chain. This is also part of these, this molecule right here is called ATPase. 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 Ace at the end of the word means what? Huh?
It's
Enzyme. Thank you. Enzyme. So what this molecule will happen to it, all of that hydrogen goes through here. All of that hydrogen goes through here, and it converts a DP to ATP. End of story.
where does the phosphate come from?
ADP has how many phosphate? 2. ATP has how many phosphate? 3. That's where it comes from. By attaching one phosphate to this, you need energy. Anytime in biology, you're saying where the phosphates are floating around inside of the cell. They're all over.
Oh, okay.
If
That's what I was asking, like where?
No, they're all over.
It's just kind of hanging out there too.
Just
huh?
hanging out there.
Alright.
Where does ADP come from? ADP also hanging out there. Of course, it takes some steps to make ADP, but ADP are just hanging out there for our purposes for now. Okay, so ADP is there. Anytime in biology, as I said, you want to put two things together, you need energy. When they break, you remember exergonic reaction? When they break, they release energy, but when you want to put them together, you need energy. So the energy that to put ADP plus phosphate plus this phosphate together to make ATP is these hydrogens. Those hydrogens are giving the energy. Let's go backward. Are you guys ready? Yeah, are you ready to go backward? Everybody is ready to go backward. Where did the ATP come from? Huh? ADP and phosphate, right? Where then, for conversion of ADP and phosphate, you need what? Hydrogen. Where did the hydrogen come from? NADH and FADH2. Am I making some sense? Where did the NADH and FADH2 come from? Citric acid cycle. Citric acid cycle, where did it come from? Acetyl-CoA. Where did acetyl-CoA come from? Pyruvate. Where pyruvate came from? You know this backward and forward, just like back of your head. You know this backward, forward. Somebody grab your collar in the mall and ask you about electron transport chain and ATP, all that. You should. You know it backward and forward. And that's what chemosmosis is. Okay, let's go over it. Let's go over the PowerPoint. Since I talked about this, let's go over the PowerPoint. Here it is. So conversion of ADP plus phosphate gives you ATP. I'm going backward. Where does that, how does this happen? By, of course, hydrogens. Hydrogens are fueling ATPase. This is ATPase right here. This is also one of the protein molecules in electron transport chain system. You remember I did draw you those protein molecules on the electron transport chain system. So those are on the inner membrane of this is inner membrane of the mitochondria. This is the crustate. On the crustate, these are protein molecules. You remember phospholipid? There is another phospholipid out here which they didn't draw. You know, this has two layers. One layer out here, the outer membrane, and this is the inner membrane. In the inner membrane, electron transport chain occur, not in the outer membrane. Outer membrane allows pyruvate comes in. There's a transport system, allows pyruvate to come in, and then pyruvate goes inside and becomes part of electron transport chain. Okay, so I hope. So this is the ATPase right here. Right here is the electrons. They call it cytochrome. All of those that I draw for you on the board, this is it. Do not worry about 1, 3, 5. They all have names and what happens and so on and so forth. Do not worry about that. Just know collectively it's called electron transport chain. Even though ATPase is part of the electron transport chain. These are called cytochromes. These are called cytochromes. Cytochrome Q, cytochrome 1, cytochrome, so on and so forth. C, when I was a student, I had to memorize all of those. Don't worry about it. You don't worry about it. Unless you go upper division, you go to graduate school, you want to get your PhD, then you have to learn those a little bit in more details. Okay, so here it is, NADH. As I said on the whiteboard, NADH becomes NAD. What happens to the hydrogen goes out there. What happens to FADH2 becomes FAD. What happens to the hydrogen? Hydrogen goes out there. Same thing again. And then, of course, for this process, one thing I'm forgetting to mention, you need oxygen. Mitochondria, for ATP formation, you do need oxygen. And here it is, oxygen. Right here, oxygen, of course, hydrogen and half of oxygen becomes water, and of course that forms some hydrogen as well. All of those hydrogens go through ATPase and gives you ATP. Let's go. Right here again, we are talking about it. Bigger picture. ATPase, ATP synthase. Some textbooks say ATP, like yours say ATP synthase. Some books say ATPase. Same thing. ATPase. I should write it on the board. ATPase equal to ATP synthase. Some people like to argue about that. I don't. I would consider it the same thing. Some people say no, but they are same. Okay, and this is the chemoosmosis that I talked about. All of that accumulated hydrogen, that's osmosis. Hydrogen from high concentration goes to low concentration. That's what they don't call it osmosis, they call it chemoosmosis. Hydrogen goes from high concentration to low concentration through that ATPase. Here we go. I'll go more wording. During cellular respiration, most energy flows in this sequence. Yes, we talked about this. Glucose becomes NADH, electron transport chain, proton motive force, which is ATP. When they're talking about proton motive force, that's ATPase. Right here. About 34% of energy in glucose molecule is transferred to ATP during cellular respiration, making 32 ATP. That's a number you should know. 32 ATP. The rest is lost as heat, thermodynamic. Okay, there are several reasons why the number of ATP is not exactly known, and I will talk about that. This is the whole entire picture of as far as ATPs. Let's go. Are you ready for this one? Okay, so one glucose molecules become 2-pyruvate. How many NADH do you generate? 2, because there are 2 pyruvates formed, right? We talked about this. You're generating 2 pyruvate, so you are making 2 NADH. Now, when pyruvate goes into the mitochondria, 2 pyruvates becomes 2 acetyl-CoA. How many NADH do you make? 2. Am I making some sense? A little bit. Then that 2 acetyl-CoA go through Krebs cycle. How many times Krebs cycle goes around with one glucose molecule? 2. Thank you. I was hoping you come up with that. 2. Because you started out with 2 pyruvate, became acetyl-CoA. One acetyl-CoA turns the Krebs cycle once, and another acetyl-CoA turns the Krebs cycle again. So the Krebs cycle occurs twice. Each turn gives you how many NADH? 3, but they wrote down 6 here because it goes around twice, right? It goes around twice. It gives you 3 NADH, so that's a total of 6 NADH. Each round gives you 1 FADH. Why they wrote down 2? Because it goes twice. Because Pyruvate is twice. Am I making some sense?
Yeah.
All these numbers are making sense. You should know those numbers by heart, which is on your left side. I had one student, I was talking about heart in zoology. He raised his hand and said, Amir, I know a person, his heart is on the right side. Yes. You're the only person in the world telling me the heart is on the right side. You know somebody, not yours, but you know somebody heart is on. But you should know it by heart. Okay, so, and then, of course, you have 2 FADH, 2 NADH, 2 FADH. So, can you run it by me? Can you run it by me? Can I erase this a little bit? Total. Give me total of NADH. NADH total. From glycolysis, how many NADH? Huh? 2 NADH, right? Conversion of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, how many NADH? 2 NADH. Do I make sense, everybody? Then, acetyl Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle. How many NADH will gives you? 6 NADH. Am I making some sense? Right? So, a Krebs cycle, how many FADH will give you? I'm going to write it neatly. I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to write it neatly because this is important. You need to know it. So, Krebs cycle and NADH. Krebs, again, how many FADH? Up 2, because the cycle goes on to FADH2. Am I making some sense? Is that all of the FADHs? No? Where else am I missing? 2 from glycolysis, right? 2 from conversion of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA. 6 from Krebs cycle, and 2, no, that's correct.
Yeah.
That's all of it. That's all of the NADH and FADH2. So total is what? Total, let's put the, I'm sorry. Total of NADH is what? Anybody? Subtotal of NADH is what? 8? Why 8? 10. 10 NADH. 2 and 2, 4 and 6, 10. So FADH2 gives you 2, right? 2 FADH2 from Krebs. 2 FADH2. Now let's go to ATP. Are you ready for ATP? Glycolysis. How many ATP you got? Let's say net, not gross. 2. Thank you. 2 ATP. Now, when you're converting pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, do you get any ATP? No, 0, zilch. Right? Let's write it up. Pyruvate, just to make sure, to acetyl-CoA, 0 ATP. Yes, no? Okay, how many ATP you get from Krebs cycle? Krebs cycle, each cycle you get 1 ATP, but cycle goes around twice because of 1 glucose molecules, you get 2 ATP. Do I make sense? Now, let's add them up. Are you ready? What did we say? We said 1 NADH equal to how many ATP? Roughly 3 ATP. Roughly. 1 FADH2 equal to 1 ATP. Now, total of 10 right here, right? 10 times what? Times 3 is 30 ATP. FADH, how many? 2 times what? 1 equal to 2 ATP. From Krebs cycle, from glycolysis to ATP from glycolysis, and then from Krebs cycle to ATP. I checked my calculator last time, that is about 36 ATP. 36 net. Some textbooks say 38 ATP because they say glycolysis gives you 4 ATP. But here we calculated 38 gross, 36 net. This is what I want you to know for this class. Katrina, have you been in Louisiana? I don't know. Maybe you went to New Orleans during the Katrina. You didn't do that. Your parents, you were too young then. You were probably about 5, 10 years old then. When Katrina occurred.
You're older than that.
Huh?
You're older than that.
Her, maybe you, but her, she was, we're talking about her.
How old is she?
I don't know. I just was telling my daughter the other day, you never ask a person their age and their weight. He said, Dad, you just asked me what is my weight this morning. I said, well, you're an exception to the rule for me.
You can't ask someone how old they are?
Huh?
You can't ask someone how old they are?
You cannot ask somebody how old they are and what is their weight. I don't know. I told my daughter, I don't know. You can tell your daughter different things. That's what it's about. Ariel, is that right? Is that what you're going to tell your daughter? Never ask anybody their age and their weight. And the salary, of course. It will come up. As you get older, things come up. Never ask their salary, how much you bought the car for, how much you bought the house for. It will come up just for now. She's only 12 years old. Those two you don't ask. As she gets older, more will come up. Maricela, right? Am I right? Let's go. Electron shuttles, span, membrane, yes, all of those are goodies. I left them in there for you guys to study them, to know them. We calculated, so your textbook says 30 per glucose, 30, 32. I disagree, I go with that amount. Again, maybe your textbook, he cannot calculate this based on this. He's saying it's 2.5. If you look at some textbooks, some biochemistry textbook, they say the amount of NADH is 2.5. When you make it 2.5 and this one make it 0.8, 0.6, then you come up with these numbers. Am I making sense? But as I said, for this class, quiz question on Wednesday, exam questions, these are the numbers I want you to know, and you know how I got them. You know how I got them. Okay? It's not like, oh, Amir, how did you get that number? I gave you the numbers. Okay? What is fermentation? Let's talk about fermentation a little bit, and we'll see the last material, how protein and fat turn into energy. I like to leave it maybe for Wednesday because I really want you to know that stuff. The fermentation, I don't know, you're doing it at home, you're making wine. Chelsea, do you make wine at home? Beer? Oh, you don't make wine, but you make beer. Huh? No? You're not what? Oh, yeah. You're right. You're under 21. I forgot all about that. Yes. Sorry about that. Okay. So, what is fermentation? And anaerobic respiration enables cells to produce ATP without use of oxygen. So, fermentation and anaerobic respiration, you do not need. For this, you need oxygen except that one, except glycolysis. Anytime you read glycolysis, oxygen is not needed, but but the rest of it you need oxygen. Most cellular respiration requires oxygen. Without oxygen, the electron transport chain will cease to operate. It will not happen. Without oxygen, mitochondria is useless. Okay. In case glycolysis couples with anaerobic respiration, AN in front of a word means what? Based on your prefix suffixes. It means without. Without air. AER, it means air. Without air. AIR. AER, it means AIR on your prefix suffixes that you're studying them, I hope, every night. In case glycolysis couples with anaerobic respiration and fermentation to produce ATP. Fermentation consists of glycolysis plus reactions that generates NAD, which can be reused by glycolysis. Two common types of alcohol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. Here they are. You started out with glucose. This is what? Alcohol fermentation, and that is lactic acid fermentation. That was the question, the homework question I asked you. Let's see what are the differences. Right? That was a quiz, not quiz question, but homework question, Stephen. They asked, what are the differences? Well, they both start with glucose. Is that right? They both undergo glycolysis. They both make ATP. You guys know what I'm talking about. So far, same thing, everything that you learned so far, same thing. Then, it makes pyruvate here, two of them. This one makes in pyruvate lactic fermentation. Pyruvate becomes lactate. How many carbons in lactate? 3. How many carbons in pyruvate? 3. Does that make sense? So, right here, that NADH that is made from glycolysis in lactic acid fermentation, which happens in your muscles. Trying, is that right? This happens in your muscles. Whatever it is, don't worry about it. Whatever this happens in your muscles, you get ATP and NADH. NAD becomes NADH by converting pyruvate to lactic acid. NADH is converted to NAD. Do I make sense, everybody? Here, that's what Ariel, is that right? Did not tell us. He said pyruvate becomes acetaldehyde. How many carbons acetaldehyde has? 2. And then what happens to that carbon, that extra carbon? What happens to it? That's carbon dioxide. That's why when you make alcohol, some gases are
the cap thing on it.
That's right. You have to have a vent for the carbon dioxide to get out. So you have acetaldehyde, you have 2 carbons, and acetaldehyde becomes ethanol, which has how many carbon? 2. And of course, same thing here again. Same thing here again. NAD becomes NADH. And NADH conversion of acetaldehyde to ethanol, you get NAD. Do that make sense, everybody? Here they are, alcohol fermentation in a little bit detail, and here is a lactic acid fermentation which happens in your muscles. When you guys go exercising, is that right? You haven't exercised for a long time, and then you go out there and kill yourself, and then next day you have a lot. It happened to all of us, doesn't it? Have anybody not done that? That's why they say when you want to start exercising after hibernation, you want to exercise start slowly. That you don't have lactic acid accumulated in your muscle cells and you feel a lot of pain.
What does the lactic acid do in your muscles?
It accumulates outside of your muscle cells, and what it causes pain and ache. It stimulates the pain nerves. That's the best answer I can give you. Some scientists argue with that. Say no, lactic acid has nothing to do with the pain. that you're having after exercise. It's something else. But most textbooks agree with you. So, but anyhow, here it is. Your liver, another picture, I'll put it in your PowerPoints. Your liver converts lactic acid to glucose when you have a lot of it, but blood glucose, you break down glycogen in your muscle cells to glucose. Glucose becomes pyruvate. Pyruvate becomes lactic acid. That excess, your pain goes away after 2-3 days. Is that right? When you exercise after 2-3 days, what happens? That lactic acid goes to the liver, and liver puts them together as glucose. It takes about 2-3 days. Animation, fermentation. Let's just watch this animation, and then I think, and then we call off. Let's see what they say.
All cells are able to synthesize ATP via the process of glycolysis. In many cells, if oxygen is not present, pyruvate is metabolized in a process called fermentation. By oxidizing the NADH produced in glycolysis, fermentation regenerates NAD+, which can take part in glycolysis once again to produce more ATP. The net energy gain in fermentation is 2 ATP molecules per molecule of glucose. Fermentation complements glycolysis and makes it possible for ATP to be continually produced in the absence of oxygen. There are 2 types of fermentation. Alcohol fermentation, which occurs in yeast, results in the production of ethanol and carbon dioxide. Lactic acid fermentation, which occurs in muscle, results in the production of lactate.
That's it. Lactic acid, another name for it is lactate. ATE at the end of the word means what? Acid. Lactic acid. Pyruvate, pyruvic acid. Okay, oxaloacetate, oxalic acid, citrate, citric acid. Anything that has AATE at the end of the word, not ASE. ASE is what? Enzyme. ASE is enzyme, and then obligate anaerobes and facultative anaerobes. These are different types of bacteria. You take microbiology, they will talk about it, but they're here. Evolutionary significance of glycolysis. Let's read this together. Ancient prokaryotes are thought to have used glycolysis long before there was oxygen in the atmosphere. Very little oxygen was available in the atmosphere until about 2.5 billion years ago. So early eukaryotes likely used only glycolysis to generate ATP. Glycolysis is a very ancient process. Glycolysis came before the cellular respiration that we're talking about, the mitochondria. Anyhow, this is something I like to talk about, take my time and talk about how fats, how proteins and fats become energy as well. Let's do this, study them. Let's do this on Wednesday. Okay, so 5 minutes break, and then let's come back and take the quiz, and then we start the lab. I'll tell you